If a building is on fire, um, your biological imperative, like your most basic primal survival instinct, is just to run. You
Yeah.
feel the heat, your brain registers the threat, and your legs instinctively carry you away from the flames.
Right. It's simple. It's binary, you know? Danger equals escape.
Exactly. And it makes perfect sense.
The human nervous system is, it's exquisitely designed to function exactly that way. It's the fundamental evolutionary architecture of survival. Threat initiates distance.
The body perceives harm and physically removes itself to preserve life.
Precisely. You don't have to think about it. You just do it.
But then you step into the realm of human relationships, specifically, deeply toxic, destructive relationships. And suddenly, that fundamental architecture seems to just, well, it completely short circuits.
It does. It completely misfires.
Because if a relationship is destroying you, if it's systematically burning your life to the ground, that exact same survival instinct should make you run away, right?
You would think so, absolutely.
So why do we often feel this intense, desperate, gravitational pull toward the very people who hurt us the most? Like, why, instead of fleeing, do we literally run back into the burning building?
It's really one of the most profoundly misunderstood dynamics in all of clinical psychology. And to be honest, the misunderstanding itself creates this massive secondary layer of suffering for the person experiencing it.
Because people judge them for staying.
Right. The world looks at them and asks, why don't you just leave? And the survivor looks at themselves just utterly baffled, asking the exact same question.
Why can't I just walk away?
Exactly. They feel like they're going crazy.
Well, that brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. We're taking a stack of clinical research, behavioral science, and neurobiology. We're talking foundational work by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, Dr. Patrick Carnes, B.F. Skinner, and we are going to completely dismantle the shame and the profound confusion surrounding toxic dynamics.
I'm really glad we're doing this. It's so necessary.
We're going to unpack the hidden mechanisms of covert narcissism, coercive control, and what's clinically known as trauma bonding.
And for anyone listening right now who has ever found themselves trapped in a dynamic they knew was harming them, but felt physically incapable of walking away, there is something we need to establish right out of the gate based purely on the clinical data.
What's that?
Staying in a harmful dynamic is not a character flaw. It is not a sign of emotional weakness, and it is certainly not a lack of intelligence.
That's such a huge misconception, isn't it? That only weak people stay.
It's totally false. What you're experiencing, what we are about to decode here, is a highly sophisticated evolutionary survival adaptation of your nervous system.
So your body's actually doing what it's supposed to do.
Yes. Your brain is doing exactly what it was wired to do under conditions of unpredictable threat. It's just being hijacked.
Wow. Okay, to really get into the mechanics of this, I think we need to clarify a major public misconception right away. Because people use the term trauma bond so casually now.
Oh, constantly. It's all over social media.
Right. You see it everywhere. People will say, oh, my coworker and I are trauma bonded because we both survived that terrible corporate retreat, or, we trauma bonded over our mutual hatred of our terrible boss.
Right, and clinically speaking, that is entirely incorrect. That's
No.
just not what the term means.
So what is the actual definition?
A trauma bond is not bonding with someone over a shared traumatic experience. That's simply a shared hardship, or a mutual grievance.
Okay.
A trauma bond is a highly specific, intense, addictive emotional attachment formed between a victim and their abuser.
Between the victim and the abuser, not two victims.
Exactly. It's forged in this very specific psychological fire, born out of a cycle of abuse, devaluation, and what behavioral scientists call intermittent positive reinforcement.
It's the bond to the source of the pain itself. Which is just wild to think about. The very fact that the brain can wire itself to love the thing that is destroying it raises a terrifying question about human vulnerability.
It does. It really exposes how our biology can be used against us.
So, to understand how the human brain becomes trapped in this invisible cage, we have to look at the psychological conditioning that actually builds the prison.
Right. We have to look at the architecture of the trap itself. And to do that, we actually have to go back to the mid-20th century and the work of behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner.
Skinner. The pigeon guy, right?
Yes, the pigeon and rat experiments. He studied how different schedules of rewards affected behavior. And he discovered this principle called intermittent reinforcement.
Okay, break that down for us. What did he find?
Well, what he found was deeply counterintuitive. He found that when rewards are delivered unpredictably rather than consistently, it creates the most persistent, compulsive, hard-to-extinguish behavior known to science.
It's the slot machine effect.
Exactly. It's exactly like a slot machine.
Because, like, if you went to a casino and sat at a slot machine and it paid out $1 every single time you pulled the lever,
Yeah.
you'd eventually get bored. It's predictable. It's just a job at that point. You'd probably just walk away.
Right. And on the flip side, if that same slot machine never, ever paid out, like if you pulled the lever 100 times and got absolutely nothing, you'd also walk away.
Because your brain registers that it's a complete waste of energy.
Exactly. But the slot machine is programmed with intermittent reinforcement. You pull the lever, you lose. You pull it again, you lose. You pull it a third time, and suddenly bells ring, lights flash, and you get a payout.
And because you never know when the reward is coming, your brain becomes obsessively fixated on the lever.
Yes. The unpredictability is the hook.
Okay, I get the slot machine analogy, but I'm going to be honest. Reading the research on this kind of broke my brain a little bit. I have to push back here.
Okay, push back.
A slot machine just quietly takes my quarters. It doesn't scream at me, it doesn't isolate me from my family, and it doesn't systematically destroy my self-esteem.
That's a very fair point.
So why doesn't the sheer pain of the verbal or emotional abuse override the unpredictable reward? Like, I mean, the human brain is smart enough to say the payout isn't worth this level of suffering.
You would definitely think so. But the answer lies in a psychological mechanism called the contrast effect, which gives birth to this deep addiction to hope.
The contrast effect.
Yeah. We have to look at how the brain processes relief. When extreme cruelty, fear, or just coldness is suddenly followed by a flash of the loving partner-like, an apology, a tender moment, a sudden declaration of love, the relief from that immense stress feels extraordinary by comparison.
Ah, I see. So a crumb tastes like an absolute feast when you're starving.
And that is the perfect way to describe it. And the brain takes that feast and neurologically locks it in. The victim's brain doesn't attach to the pain. In fact, the brain actively rejects the pain.
So what are they attaching to?
What the brain attaches to, what it becomes literally addicted to, is the hope that the loving version of the partner, the payout, basically will return permanently.
They think if I just do things right, the good version will stay.
Right. The victim starts believing that if they are just patient enough, perfect enough, or understanding enough, that loving version will stay forever. And you have to understand, this isn't delusional.
It's not.
No, because it's based on evidence. They have seen the loving version. The good times actually happened. The contrast effect just distorts reality, making the victim minimize the chronic abuse and massively overvalue the sporadic kindness.
Wow. And there's a famous, somewhat controversial psychological experiment that perfectly illustrates this paradox, isn't there? Harry Harlow's monkeys.
Yes. In the 1950s, Harry Harlow conducted experiments on infant rhesus macaques to study the nature of attachment. He took infant monkeys away from their biological mothers and gave them two inanimate surrogate mothers.
Right, the wire and the cloth mothers.
Exactly. One was made entirely of bare wire but had a bottle attached to it, so it provided food. The other was covered in soft terry cloth but provided no food at all.
Logically, you'd assume the monkey attaches to the wire mother, right?
Yeah.
Because it provides the literal sustenance required to stay alive.
Right. But the infant monkeys spent overwhelmingly more time clinging to the cloth mother. They would only briefly go to the wire mother to feed and then immediately run right back to the cloth mother.
Because they needed the comfort more than the calories.
Yes. But here's where it connects directly to trauma bonding. Harlow then introduced a frightening stimulus into the cage, like a really noisy, scary mechanical toy.
And what happened?
The terrified infant monkey didn't run away from the cloth mother. It ran to the cloth mother. It clung to it desperately for comfort.
Even though the source of the comfort was in the exact same environment as the danger.
Yes. And in later variations of these types of attachment studies, researchers found something even darker. They found that even if the surrogate mother itself was designed to occasionally reject or introduce a noxious stimulus to the infant.
Wait, really? Even if the cloth mother was the one hurting them?
Yes. Even if the cloth mother was the source of the pain, the frightened infant would still cling to it even harder.
Oh my God.
It proves a fundamental truth about mammalian attachment. It is driven by the desperate need for comfort in the face of fear. In a trauma bond, the abuser creates a terrifying, unstable environment.
Because they're also the primary attachment figure, the victim's nervous system instinctively seeks comfort from the very person causing the terror.
Exactly. The abuser is both the terrifying mechanical toy and the cloth mother.
That is a chilling paradox.
Yeah.
And the slot machine effect. this desperate clinging for comfort. It isn't just a psychological trick, is it? It creates a literal physiological chemical dependency in the body.
Absolutely. It's a neurobiological addiction.
So when that lever is pulled, what is physically happening inside the brain of the victim? Let's talk about the four chemicals of coercive control.
Okay, we are looking at a profound neurochemical hijacking here. When a relationship oscillates unpredictably between extreme distress and intense rescue, it throws the brain's threat response and reward systems into absolute chaos.
The sources heavily emphasize dopamine first. But typically, we hear dopamine described as the pleasure chemical, like the thing that makes you feel good. How does that keep you trapped in something that feels awful?
Well, dopamine is deeply misunderstood in pop science. It's
Yeah.
much more accurately described as the craving or seeking chemical. It drives goal-directed behavior.
So it's not the reward itself, it's the hunt for the reward.
Precisely. In a trauma bond, dopamine actually spikes highest during the anticipation of the reward, not during the reward itself.
Mhm.
Because the abuser's affection is unpredictable, the victim's dopamine system is hyperactivated.
And what happens when the abuser pulls away or gets cold?
When the abuser withdraws, dopamine drops sharply, creating a physiological craving, like a literal withdrawal symptom, to restore the connection and win back the affection. It is the engine of the slot machine.
It's the chemical keeping your hand on the lever, waiting for the bells to ring. Okay, so the second chemical the clinical data points to is oxytocin. Again, usually framed as a positive thing, the cuddle hormone. It's what bonds a mother to a child. How on earth does an abuser weaponize a bonding hormone?
Oxytocin forces attachment. It just does. In a trauma bond, oxytocin is released in massive waves during the intense makeup or reconciliation phases.
The honeymoon after the fight?
Right, and it forcefully binds the victim to the abuser, creating a deep biochemical sense of trust, even when the victim's logical brain completely knows the person is dangerous.
It essentially forces the brain to trust the untrustworthy.
Yes, it's forced trust.
That explains so much, like why victims will fiercely defend their abusers to their friends and family or even lie to the police to protect them. The oxytocin is literally blinding their threat assessment.
It overrides the logic completely.
But the threat is still there, which brings us to the third chemical, cortisol.
Cortisol is the primary stress hormone. During the devaluation phase, when the abuser is, giving the silent treatment, screaming, gaslighting, or threatening, the victim's brain is just flooded with cortisol.
Their heart races, their digestion stops, their muscles tense.
Exactly. The body is thrust into a literal life or death survival state.
You're just constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next explosion. And I want to pause here because the clinical research notes that chronic exposure to this level of cortisol is highly toxic to the brain.
It is severely neurotoxic, yes.
How toxic are we talking? What does this do to a person's actual brain structure over time?
It literally reshapes the physical architecture of the brain. Prolonged exposure to this cortisol dopamine swing causes structural thinning of the prefrontal cortex.
Wait, structural thinning, like the brain actually shrinks?
Yes, the high levels of cortisol are so toxic that they cause the dendrites, which are the branching connections between neurons in the prefrontal cortex, to literally shrink and retract.
And what does the prefrontal cortex do?
That is the area of the brain responsible for executive functioning, logical reasoning, self-awareness, and accurate risk assessment.
Oh my God. So the logic center is physically degrading. It's being taken offline.
Yes, and simultaneously, the amygdala, which is the primitive subcortical threat and fear center of the brain, becomes hyperactivated and physically enlarged.
So your fear center grows while your logic center shrinks.
Precisely. The brain establishes deep, permanent neural pathways that associate the abuser with both extreme, life-threatening danger and the ultimate safety and reward.
Because the prefrontal cortex is compromised, the victim literally loses the capacity to logically evaluate the danger and leave.
Right, they are left relying entirely on the primitive animal brain just to survive the day.
And just when that animal brain feels like it can't take another second of the terror, the explosion stops. The abuser apologizes, which triggers the fourth chemical, endogenous opioids.
Yes, these are the brain's natural painkillers. When the acute threat subsides, the profound relief the victim feels triggers the release of these opioids.
And they just flood the nervous system.
They do. They flood the system, creating a narcotic-like comfort, a deep, euphoric relief from the agonizing stress. This is why the reconciliation phase feels so intensely passionate and soul-binding to the victim.
So this cocktail dopamine driving the craving, oxytocin forcing the trust, Cortisol structurally degrading logic, and opioids acting as a literal narcotic rescue. It creates the ultimate tragic paradox.
It really is a tragedy of biology.
The abuser becomes encoded biologically in the victim's nervous system as both the poison and the only known antidote.
Yes, if you leave the abuser, you are leaving the only source of the opioid relief your body has become chemically addicted to.
It's like telling someone with a severe heroin addiction to just logically stop liking heroin.
Exactly. The withdrawal is entirely physiological. The brain has been hijacked.
Okay, so no one walks up to a stranger on a first date and says, hi, I'm going to subject you to an intermittent reinforcement schedule that will chemically shrink your prefrontal cortex.
No, of course not. They'd never get a second date.
All right, it happens slowly. It requires a systematic dismantling of a person's boundaries. And the clinical research, specifically Dr. Patrick Carnes, who coined the term betrayal bond, outlines this capture through 7 chronological stages.
It's a very predictable, methodical process.
Let's look at how this plays out in real life.
Yeah.
Imagine a highly successful, independent person entering a new relationship. How does stage 1 and stage 2, love bombing and trust, actually function? Because to an outsider, it just looks like the honeymoon phase.
That's the trap. In a healthy relationship, the honeymoon phase is about mutual discovery, joy, and a gradual building of connection over time. But love bombing is a predatory tactic.
So what's the hidden mechanism there?
Its hidden mechanism is to rapidly, artificially establish a baseline of extreme euphoria and dependency. The abuser acts as a mirror. They reflect all your hopes, dreams, and insecurities, positioning themselves as the only person who has ever truly seen you.
They figure out exactly what you want to hear, and they become that.
Exactly. They might declare your soulmates within a week or push for immediate commitment. The goal is to flood your brain with dopamine and oxytocin so quickly that you completely bypass your normal vetting processes.
They are getting you addicted to the high before they introduce the low. They establish this intense trust in stage 2. You start isolating yourself organically because this new perfect person takes up all your time.
Right. You think you're just happily in love.
And then the mask drops. We enter stage 3 and stage 4. Criticism and gaslighting.
And this shift is profoundly disorienting. The person who just weeks ago thought you were flawless suddenly finds you deeply inadequate.
The warmth is replaced by subtle criticisms, emotional withholding, and moving the goalposts. You find yourself working harder and harder just to regain the warmth of the love bombing stage.
Yes, you're chasing that original high.
And when you try to bring it up, when you say, hey, you're hurting my feelings, or you promised you wouldn't do that, they deploy stage 4, gaslighting.
Yes, which is devastating.
But I want to really dig into the mechanism here. Gaslighting isn't just lying, is it? Like, how does it actually dismantle someone's reality testing?
Gaslighting is a systematic assault on the victim's perception of reality. It operates by introducing intense cognitive dissonance. The abuser doesn't just deny an event happened, they attack the victim's cognitive machinery for remembering the event.
They attack the memory itself.
Right. They say, I never said that, your memory's terrible lately, or you're acting crazy, you're always making things up. By doing this repeatedly, while the victim is under the influence of that forced oxytocin trust we discussed, the victim's brain faces an impossible choice.
What's the choice?
They have to either believe their own memory and lose the attachment figure, or doubt their own memory and keep the bond.
And over time, the brain chooses the bond.
Always. The victim literally stops trusting their own senses and outsources their reality testing entirely to the abuser.
That neurological surrender paves the way for stage 5, resignation and submission. The fight just goes out of you.
Cool.
The literature mentions the fawn response here, coined by trauma specialist Pete Walker. What exactly is happening in the nervous system during fawning?
Well, when humans face a threat, our autonomic nervous system assesses survival options. We try to fight. If we can't win, we try to flee. If we are trapped, we freeze.
Fight, flight, freeze. We've all heard of those.
Right. But when fight, flight, or freeze are not viable options for survival, particularly when you literally live with the threat, the nervous system resorts to fawning.
What does that look like?
This is the deep, unconscious compulsion to appease, accommodate, and anticipate the abuser's needs to prevent further violence or emotional withdrawal.
You take the blame for things you didn't do just to restore the peace. You apologize for breathing the wrong way. You constantly walk on eggshells.
Exactly. You aren't just choosing to be submissive. Your nervous system has calculated that submission is the only way to avoid a fatal cortisol spike.
The victim accepts the abuser's control because the alternative, The relentless conflict and gaslighting is just too emotionally exhausting to survive.
Yes, the exhaustion is a weapon.
And that exhaustion forces stage 6, loss of self. You become a ghost in your own life. The isolation is complete, your self-esteem is entirely eroded.
You no longer know what you like, what you want, or what your boundaries are because every aspect of your identity has been subjugated to the abuser's whims.
Which culminates in stage 7, emotional addiction. The relationship now operates in a closed, repeating loop. Tension builds, the abusive incident occurs, the abuser offers a brief reconciliation, and then there's temporary calm.
And the victim's nervous system is fully conditioned to endure the hyperarousal of the abuse, specifically to receive the neurochemical high of that reconciliation.
The trauma bond is fully cemented.
Yes, the capture is complete.
The terrifying part of seeing this mapped out is realizing just how methodical it is. And it brings up a massive, fascinating curiosity gap for me.
What's that?
Well, if you are listening to this breakdown, you might assume that only highly naive, incredibly vulnerable, or easily manipulated people fall into this trap. But the clinical data shows something completely different, doesn't it?
It does. It shows the exact opposite in many cases.
Right. What happens when the victim is the CEO, a brilliant executive, a highly driven, hyper-competent person who runs a boardroom with an iron fist? How does someone like that end up fawning and trauma-bonded?
It is known as the high-functioning survivor paradox, and it is incredibly common. Driven, high-achieving individuals are actually uniquely vulnerable to this specific type of covert abuse.
Why? That seems so counterintuitive.
It stems from a profound cognitive dissonance. Their entire professional identity is built on their capacity to manage difficult personalities, solve complex problems, and maintain absolute control under immense pressure.
Oh, I see. So to admit that they are being subjugated and manipulated at home,
Yeah, true.
it goes against everything they fundamentally believe about themselves.
Exactly. The idea that they are experiencing profound emotional abuse at the hands of a partner who is completely bypassing all of their executive defenses is deeply dissonant with their self-image.
So how do they handle it when the abuse starts?
When the abuse begins, their instinct isn't to flee. Their instinct is to intellectualize the problem. They view the toxic relationship through the lens of management theory.
They think they can optimize it.
Yes, they think, if I just communicate better, if I read the right relationship books, if we go to counseling, I can hack this dynamic and fix it.
They treat the abuser like a difficult employee or a challenging corporate merger. But you can't manage a narcissist.
No, you absolutely cannot.
Especially not a covert narcissist. Like overt narcissists might yell, throw things, or use obvious physical intimidation. But covert narcissists use subtle psychological warfare that leaves absolutely no bruises.
They are masters of the invisible attack.
What are the specific weaponized tactics they use against these high-functioning individuals to bypass their intellect?
One of the most effective tactics is called word salad.
Word salad. Like just throwing words around.
Sort of, yes. When the executive survivor tries to hold the covert narcissist accountable for a broken promise or bad behavior, the narcissist doesn't just argue back logically. They deploy a dizzying, nonsensical array of deflections, projections, and irrelevant grievances.
They just muddy the waters.
Completely. They will bring up something you did 3 years ago, play the victim, twist your words, and change the subject so rapidly that your brain literally cannot process the logic.
Because there is no logic. The hidden emotional need for the abuser isn't communication, it's exhaustion. You're already tired from running a company all day, and now you're in a 3-hour circular argument about something entirely unrelated to the original issue.
And eventually you just give up to get some sleep. You surrender.
Wow. Was another tactic.
Another common tactic is dog whistling. This is an action or a comment that appears completely innocent to an outside observer, like, say, at a dinner party with colleagues. But it carries a specific, devastating, threatening meaning to the victim.
Give me an example of that.
It might be a subtle sigh, a specific glance across the table, or a backhanded compliment about the survivor's ambition. To everyone else, the partner looks so supportive.
But the survivor knows that sigh means, you are talking too much, I am furious, and you are going to pay for this the minute we get in the car.
Exactly. And that is so deeply isolating.
Because if you try to complain to your friends, they say, what do you mean? He just sighed. You're being paranoid. He's such a great guy. It reinforces the gaslighting perfectly. The survivor looks crazy to the outside world.
Right, which further traps the executive in the bond. And perhaps the most insidious tactic used against high-functioning survivors is weaponized therapy speak.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
Driven individuals often try to use validating language or therapy concepts to establish boundaries. They read the books, right?
Right.
The covert narcissist will absorb this language and turn it back on the victim. They might say, I hear that you feel unsupported, but your corporate analysis of our relationship is violating my boundaries, and your workaholic ambition is evidence of your unhealed emotional detachment.
That is sickening. They use the vocabulary of healing to paint themselves as a long-suffering victim of the survivor's success.
Yes. The deeper, tragic lesson here is that the abuser exploits the executive's very best traits.
They take the survivor's resilience, their high capacity for endurance, their willingness to take accountability, and their relentless problem-solving skills, and they twist those strengths into the bars of their own cage.
It's a complete inversion of reality. The survivor's ability to endure immense stress becomes the exact tool the abuser uses to keep them trapped in the cycle.
The narcissist relies entirely on the fact that the executive will overfunction, take all the blame, and exhaust themselves trying to fix the unfixable.
Exactly. They weaponize their competence against them.
The fact that an executive can be so easily dismantled by these tactics raises a disturbing question, though. It implies that the vulnerability isn't in their current intellect, but in their historical blueprint.
That's a very astute observation, yes.
Because if this trap is so agonizing, so neurologically damaging, why do some survivors escape one abusive relationship only to find themselves married to a different version of the exact same person 5 years later?
It's a painful reality for many survivors.
To answer that, we have to pivot from the present moment and look into the deep past. Which brings us to the research of 1920.
Right. We have to look at a concept called repetition compulsion. To understand it, we go back to a famous story involving Sigmund Freud.
The father of psychoanalysis.
Yes. Freud was observing his 18-month-old grandson, Ernst. The child had invented this peculiar game. He had a wooden cotton reel tied to a string. He would throw the reel over the edge of his crib out of sight and shout, "Fort!" which is German for gone.
Okay.
Then he would pull the string, retrieve the reel, and happily shout, "Da!" meaning there. And he did this over and over again. Gone. There.
Throwing it away, pulling it back. Why was a toddler playing with a spool of thread so significant to Freud?
Well, at the time, Ernst's mother, Freud's daughter, was frequently leaving him for long periods. Freud realized that the child was not just playing, he was symbolically reenacting the painful, traumatic departure of his mother.
But why reenact the pain? Why not just play with blocks?
Freud concluded that by controlling the departure and return of the toy, the child was attempting to gain a sense of mastery over the trauma. He was turning a passive experience of helpless abandonment into an active game he could control.
He's trying to rewrite the ending of the story.
Precisely. And this translates directly into adult relationships. It creates what the literature calls the unconscious casting call.
Repetition compulsion is the unconscious drive to seek out partners, situations, or emotional dynamics that perfectly fit the emotional blueprint of our early, often traumatic, childhood experiences with caregivers.
We unconsciously cast people in the roles of our distant fathers or volatile mothers.
I have to pause because this is where the logic breaks down for a lot of people. If you grew up with chaos, shouldn't you consciously want peace? Why would your brain seek out the thing that hurt you?
Consciously, you absolutely want peace. But the nervous system does not seek what is good or healthy. The nervous system seeks what is familiar.
The familiarity is what matters to the body.
Yes. According to Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory, our nervous system is constantly evaluating safety and danger below our conscious awareness, a process called neuroception. If you were raised in an unpredictable, emotionally volatile, or abusive environment, your baseline for normal is chaos.
So when you meet a stable, consistent, kind partner, your nervous system actually interprets that piece as terrifyingly foreign.
Exactly. It feels like the calm before the storm. It feels dangerous because it's unknown. You're just waiting for the other shoe to drop.
But when you meet a volatile, hot and cold, covert narcissist,
Your nervous system lights up. It says, I know this landscape. I know how to survive here. The volatile partner feels like home.
wow. You are pulled toward the familiar pain in an unconscious, lifelong attempt to finally get the unloving caregiver to love you, to finally master the trauma.
That's exactly it. It's a drive for mastery that ends up just repeating the injury.
This is a lot of heavy terminology, and I want to make sure the listener is crystal clear on the distinctions, because these terms get thrown around interchangeably on the internet, and they are not the same
They
thing.
get very conflated, yes.
Can you clearly break down the exact clinical differences between repetition, compulsion, trauma bonding, learned helplessness, and self-sabotage, because knowing the mechanism dictates how you heal from it.
It is a crucial distinction. Let's separate them. First, repetition compulsion. This is the internal unconscious drive to repeat early childhood trauma across a lifetime of different relationships in an attempt to master it. It's the historical blueprint you carry inside you.
Right. What about trauma bonding?
Trauma bonding is not a lifelong pattern. This is the specific, literal neurochemical attachment to one specific abusive person in the present, formed through the intermittent reinforcement we discussed earlier. You can have a trauma bond without having repetition compulsion.
Okay, got it. And learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness is a cognitive resignation. After being subjected to repeated, uncontrollable stress or abuse, the victim literally stops believing that escape is possible. They don't stay because they are chemically bonded. They stay because their brain has learned that fighting back or trying to leave is biologically useless.
It's pure despair. And finally, self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage is a broad umbrella term for the surface behavior of ruining one's own goals or happiness. You might self-sabotage a good relationship because of repetition compulsion, but self-sabotage is just the action, not the underlying neurological mechanism.
That clarity is incredibly helpful. It strips away the mystery. Now, I want to bring this into the present day.
Okay.
Historically, if an abuser wanted to isolate a victim, which we know is stage 6 of the trauma bond, they had to physically lock them in a house, take away their car keys, cut the phone line. But today, the isolation is digital.
It's the modern panopticon.
And the sources suggest it makes breaking a trauma bond exponentially harder.
The modern landscape of coercive control relies heavily on technology. The Tech Safety Planning Toolkit for Survivors highlights how abusers use our constant connectivity as an invisible leash.
An invisible leash. That is a terrifying image.
Coercive control is defined as a pattern of domination designed to restrict a person's freedom and strip away their autonomy. Technology facilitates this seamlessly without the abuser even needing to be in the room.
Digital gaslighting. It's truly terrifying. What does that actually look like day to day?
Abusers will demand passwords to all social media and email accounts under the guise of transparency in a relationship. They will use location tracking on your smartphone without your consent.
Just constantly watching.
Yes. They will install hidden cameras in the home or use smart home devices like remote thermostats or lighting to harass the victim from afar. They will monitor text messages and threaten to release intimate images if the victim tries to leave.
Think about the psychological horror of that for a second. If your abuser has access to your location, your text, and your smart home devices, you are never truly alone.
Never. The hypervigilance never turns off.
And if we connect this to the neurochemistry we discussed, if you are never alone, your nervous system can never ever return to baseline. You remain in a permanent state of hypervigilance.
Right. The cortisol overload never stops.
Because you are constantly bracing for the next digital attack. The abuser doesn't even have to be in the same state as you to trigger the trauma bond cycle.
The intermittent reinforcement can be delivered via a single text message. The trauma bond never gets a chance to weaken because the digital leash ensures the conditioning is constantly reinforced. The body is kept in a perpetual state of anticipatory dread.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you, the listener. If you are hearing this and you recognize the slot machine effect, the 4 chemicals, the 7 stages, the invisible digital leash, once you see the pattern, how do you actually break the bond?
That is the most important question.
How do you get out? When you look at the clinical data on recovery, there is a massive paradigm shift in how psychologists treat this, isn't there?
Yes. The paradigm shift is that leaving a trauma-bonded relationship is not treated as a breakup. It is treated as clinical addiction withdrawal.
You have to treat it like detoxing from a hard substance.
Exactly. When you finally break contact, your brain goes into severe physiological withdrawal. Clinicians often refer to a 90-day timeline.
What happens during those 90 days?
During those first few weeks and months, the survivor will experience profound depression, panic attacks, physical illness, nausea, and obsessive, desperate cravings to contact the abuser.
And it's so important to know that this is not because you made the wrong decision.
No, not at all.
And it is not because you have a profound soulmate connection. It is your brain's dopamine and opioid systems screaming in agony for their unpredictable chemical hit.
Right, your body is physically detoxing. This is why the absolute non-negotiable cornerstone of breaking a trauma bond is strict no contact.
No contact whatsoever.
Every time you look at their social media, every time you answer a breadcrumbing text message, every time you meet up for closure, you pull the lever on the slot machine. You restart the neurochemical conditioning from day one.
So to break the bond, the intermittent reinforcement must completely permanently cease.
Yes, you have to shut down the slot machine.
But even with no contact, the trauma is still living inside the victim, right? As Dr. Bessel van der Kolk famously titled his book, The Body Keeps the Score. How do you heal the body when the logic center, the prefrontal cortex, has been structurally thinned and is still trying to reboot?
That's where standard therapies often fall short. Traditional talk therapy is often not enough for trauma bond recovery. You can logically know the person is toxic,
Right.
but your body still yearns for them.
Because the trauma is stored as raw, unintegrated sensory fragments in the hyperactive amygdala.
Exactly. To heal, you have to bypass the language centers entirely. One of the most effective clinical treatments for this is EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Wait, pause there. I've heard of EMDR, but how does moving my eyes back and forth actually rewrite a trauma pathway in my brain? What is the biological lever being pulled there?
It sounds a bit like magic, but it's pure neurology. EMDR uses bilateral stimulation, usually guiding the patient's eyes back and forth or using alternating physical taps on the hands while the patient holds the traumatic memory in their mind.
Okay. What does the bilateral stimulation do?
This bilateral stimulation mimics the psychological state of REM sleep. It activates the brain's adaptive information processing system by repeatedly crossing the corpus callosum, which is the bridge between the left and right hemispheres of the brain.
And what's the result of that?
It essentially takes those raw, terrifying emotional fragments stuck in the primitive amygdala and forcefully helps the brain process and integrate them into the prefrontal cortex as a coherent historical narrative.
Wow. It's moving the memory from the active threat folder into the past history folder.
That's exactly what it's doing.
It takes the physical terror out of the memory. If it's just a bad memory, rather than a bodily panic attack every time you think of it, it strips the abuser of their physiological power over you.
Yes, it unwires the neurochemical hook. The body finally learns that the threat is over.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. What is the fundamental takeaway here?
The takeaway is validation.
Trauma bonding is not a weakness. It is not a flaw in your character. It is your biology, your literal nervous system, fighting to survive unpredictable danger, using the exact mechanisms it evolved to use.
Exactly. Your body was trying to save you.
By understanding the neurochemical hooks of intermittent reinforcement, the slot machine of dopamine and cortisol, and the deep unconscious shadows of repetition compulsion, you can finally, truly stop blaming yourself for staying. The cage was made of your own neurochemistry, weaponized against you.
Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied. When you can name the invisible dynamics, the coercive control, the fawning, the chemical addiction, you strip them of their power.
You bring them into the light.
Yes. You begin the journey of moving the trauma out of your body and reclaiming your executive function.
As we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought, something for you to just, mull over. We talked about how if your nervous system has spent your entire life, from childhood to your adult relationships, associating chaos with love.
And associating the sudden relief from abuse as the deepest form of affection.
Right. What happens when you finally break the bond? What happens when you do the hard work of EMDR, you endure the 90-day withdrawal, and you finally meet someone who is simply consistently, boringly safe?
That is the ultimate test of recovery, when there is no slot machine, when there is no burning building to run into.
Will you have the courage to endure the quiet?
Will you be able to sit in the stillness of a predictable relationship and retrain your body to accept a love that doesn't require you to bleed for it first?
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.